Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on understanding the admissions process. My name is Darren Worcester from the Enrollment Management Association and admission.org, and I'll be your host today. In a second, I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest, but a couple quick notes before I do so. Today's presentation is brought to us with support from the Bolles School. They are a co-ed college prep day and boarding school for grades pre-K through 12 in our sunshine state of Florida. So we thank them very much for their support. This presentation would not be possible without their help. So we're grateful for that. Secondly, we're going to be answering questions about the process as a whole and answering questions that help everyone in attendance today equally. So if you've got specific questions about your child or your situation, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the schools that you're applying to. You may even find with those questions you get different answers from different schools because schools will treat those things differently. I will also note that other than some general process questions, we're going to steer away from financial aid today. Not that we don't think it's important. On the contrary, we deem it extremely important, and we have a whole separate presentation to discuss that. But if you go to admission.org and under events and you go to our recorded events section, you will find two different presentations on it. All right, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Kila McCann. She is the Dean of Enrollment and Accessibility at the Bolles School in Florida. And we are in for a treat because Kila's been in admissions, both in college and independent schools in Canada, in the United States for over 25 years. So Kila, we are so grateful to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share a little insight into the world of admission. As I say to my families who come through, there's no Oz behind the curtain. We're going to try to be as transparent and open as possible and address many of the questions you posed in the registration.
Excellent. Thank you, Kila. So to get started, I think so many people when they signed up just said, I'm just here. I need to know what the process is. I need to know when I have things due, that sort of stuff. So can you give us a general overview of how the process goes and when the important milestones and deadlines are?
So the first step in the process, and I always say this to our families and our students who come through, take a breath, breathe. We're here to partner with you and walk you through this process and be your concierge through this process. The first step is to really understand what you're looking for in a school for your child. So part of that inquiry process as you start is, searching the websites, doing a little bit of homework in terms of what's important to us as a family in terms of the educational experience for our child. You're looking for things as broad as geography, day boarding, different levels. So whether it's lower, middle, or upper school, you're looking at the academic program. You're looking at big schools, small schools, medium schools. You're really doing a little bit of homework on what sort of environment do I think my child would thrive best in. And then also, what's the end goal? What do I value most in terms of the educational experience? And from there, there are many resources where you can go and start to do a little bit of research. Ultimately, from there, you want to inquire to some schools. You want to, either call the school, go online and submit a formal inquiry, attend an event perhaps, maybe an open house. And you want to ask questions about the process, the timeline, space availability, selectivity, and programming, both educational and extracurricular. So you want to ask all of those questions. But through the start of it, you're really developing a relationship with the admission team. Then from there, you're going to start that process probably September, October. And then you're going to start to work through the admission application process during that time. And there are many steps in the admission application process. Most of us have a deadline anywhere between January or March. It really depends on your school. For instance, at my school, it's January 30th. And then we're much like the college process in the fact that we spend about a month reading all the files, considering all of our applicants, and then releasing our admission decisions on March 4th. That's pretty standard across independent school world, but there's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of deadlines and then release dates. But there are multiple steps in that consideration process.
Excellent. Thank you. So I mentioned the financial aid component, and we do have a whole presentation on that, but can you talk a little bit more about how the aid applications line up with the admissions applications?
That's a great question. So, for most of us, we only determine possible financial need for families who have completed the admission process. So, if you were to just complete the financial aid process in October and say, well, I don't really want to apply until I know if I'm going to receive financial aid, it's not quite how it works. So, you have to go through the admission process. At the same time, you would also be submitting your financial aid application. Each school uses their own third-party portal to assess for financial need, and there are multiple partners out there, but you can usually link through on an individual school's website. For my school, I released the offer of financial aid or the financial aid decision at the same time that I released the initial admission decision. Some schools have a little bit of a delayed process, so they'll release the admission process, a decision, and then the financial aid decision. It really depends on the school, and again, you're following that similar timeline in terms of application submission.
To follow up on that, you mentioned many schools, the deadlines are the same. Sometimes there's a little bit of a staggering there. But ultimately, parents will have knowledge of both when they have to make their decision, correct?
That's correct. That is the hope. If for some reason you have two schools that are not on the same timeline, for instance, I actually have an applicant in process right now who is from Canada who's going to receive has to tell their school in January whether or not their child is returning, but we don't release our decisions until March 4th. Just work with the school on that. The school that you're applying to will have some flexibility and be able to work with you for the most part. Some schools have rolling admission, which is based on space availability, so they don't follow the natural deadline. Some schools release really early, some schools release just as you apply. So it's important for you to understand what those deadlines look like for each school.
It sounds like we're back to our caveat from the beginning and our rule of thumb around those deadlines and just making sure that you talk to each school individually with those, correct?
Yeah, it's really a partnership, to be honest. I mean, I jokingly say often, the admission team's going to know your dog's name, they're going to know the car you drive, they're going to know your family, and likely you're going to develop a pretty strong relationship if we're going through this process correctly, both on our side and your side. And so, really getting to know the folks in the admission office that you're working with, who are working with your child, is fundamental to this process. And there is no bad question as you go through.
That's great and hopefully reassuring for folks to hear. One question we get actually for both sides of that fence, the application and the financial aid piece is, let's say a school has a January 1st or a January 15th deadline. Here we are in late October. Is there any advantage to getting all that stuff done and submitted in early November, assuming they're not a rolling admissions school?
Yeah. It's a great question, and the answer is no. We don't look at, well, this group of folks completed their application before the end of October. As long as you're meeting that deadline of application, there's no ranking system in terms of how fast you get your application done. Ideally, you want to have everything completed by whatever the school's deadline is, and that would mean, you know, biodemographical piece of the application, teacher recommendations, interview, shadow or visit, testing, grades, and then whatever essays, whatever else the school requires. You want to make sure you have all of that submitted prior to that deadline date.
Perfect. Thank you. I think one of the other things that families and parents get a little bit of anxiety over is just, especially if it's their first time going through the process, is that clicking the button and clicking submit on that application. Have I done everything? Have I done it right? What if I messed it up? Maybe you can describe a little bit what happens on your end after they push that submit button.
Yep, great question. So there's a couple steps to this. So the first thing is if you do a formal inquiry, and let's just say you've started the application process, many of us have an admission portal that you then receive a login to that you're able to log in and check where you are in the checklist items. So what have I submitted? Is it submitted correctly? And again, you will work with someone in the admission office who will also provide perspective into the process. So they may say, Darren, we're still missing your English teacher rec. Can you please follow up with your child's English teacher to get that submitted before the deadline? So again, that partnership is really important. And as a parent, you will be able to walk through that online portal for most of us. And if they don't have a portal, you can work with the admission department to go through those steps. I cannot emphasize enough that our goal is to alleviate as much stress in this process as possible. I'm not in the business of causing trauma to your children or to you. This should not feel like another job. So please lean on us to help make that a little more easier for you. And if you start, let's say in early October and start submitting it, it will not feel as stressful as it will if you leave it right before the deadline date.
Excellent. Thank you. So, process aside, probably the second most asked question that we receive is what's most important out of all the application steps that are involved, whether it's writing the or doing the interview, writing the essay, getting the recommendations, taking the assessments, is there a step that's more important than the other that they should care about? How do you view this on your end? What are you looking for from the school side?
That's it's always often asked. I think the biggest thing, there are several components to this. I often share with families, testing is one piece of a six-piece consideration process. Grades are one piece of the consideration process. Interviews or discussions with parents and the admission folks and students and the admission folks is one piece. And really what we're looking at is the student's story. And why are you looking at our schools? Why is the student interested in attending our schools? How will they leverage our program and really stretch and grow themselves once they're here? Depending on the size of the school, the programming of the school, there's a lot of options under one roof for your child really to dive in and explore and be brave. And really, that's what independent school is all about in many ways. So what we're looking for is, who is your child? Will they thrive at our school? Do they want to be here? Or do you want them here, but maybe they're not on the same page? So we're looking at those things. We're looking at, what does your child bring to our community that maybe we need to have? Maybe this is a place where we really need someone like your child too. So we're looking at all of those processes. I say that all those things are one piece of a six-piece process, but let's just say that we have teacher recommendations that perhaps share with us information that might suggest that your child's maybe not thriving in their current school. And then we see some grades that are reflective of that, and even perhaps some test scores. That may influence the decision when there's sort of that alignment in performance on the academic side. Often, though, what happens is we'll see high test scores, maybe not as strong of academics, but teacher recs that say, Darren's working really hard and he does his homework consistently. Parents are great partners of the school. In which case, what we're seeing is, this is a kid who works really hard, who maybe just, he's achieving his best success. And if that means a B in Algebra 1, well, then that's a B, and that's okay. So every school is looking at that entire picture of the student and areas where the student will engage in their community, what they may bring to that community, and if they are a right fit in terms of the school's mission.
That's great. Thank you for kind of digging into that and really framing, why you look at both grades and assessment scores, because I do think that's another question that parents have. An interesting question came in through the Q&A when you were discussing the importance of getting to know your admissions representative, and that, by the end of this process, if everybody's doing this right, you're going to be like this.
Yep.
Um, what the question effectively is, what is the expectation for the child's involvement in this? And I think with you being a pre-K through 12, that answer probably changes and you probably have a unique perspective on it.
Well, it's a great question, and what we're finding more and more, especially through reports, done by EMA and some other partners, is that at a younger age, children are driving the decision. So it used to be that at upper school, so grades 9 through 12, we saw a little bit more of the child's influence on the decision of where they might go to school. Now we're seeing it trickle down all the way down to lower school. Um, I think in some ways that's a really good thing because this is about a place where a child feels as though they fit and they can achieve their best success. Um, I think it's hard for on the school side when we have a parent who perhaps wants their child so badly to go to a school, but the child is just not part of their plan. And so I always tell parents, look, if your child is not on board with this, then this is not going to be a great decision. They're not going to thrive, they're not going to achieve their best success, and they're not just going to get on board because they're here. So we need to be really intentional in that. The child's lens is very important, and it's why there's importance on them visiting or shadowing or even spending the night in the dorm if they're looking at boarding. Because I tell students all the time, if you don't listen to that little voice, that's a problem. So when you visit or shadow or when you spend the night, it's not about content of what is happening in the class. It's what does the student teacher engagement look like? As I walked around, were people friendly? Did I understand or was I a little bit overwhelmed? Were people open? What was the discussion like in class? Even things down to how good was the food? I mean, sometimes that's a big deciding factor for students. Was the campus so big that it was overwhelming, or are you a student who size isn't a big deal because maybe you come from a big school? So all of those perspectives on the student side is very, very important.
Excellent. Thank you. We got a lot of questions around extracurricular activities, and I know as a parent, scheduling with your child, all your child's different activities, can be hectic. And, the parents probably hear different stories from other parents and other advisors, that sort of stuff. How important are the activities, when you're reviewing a candidate's file?
Sure. It really depends on the school, right? For us, athletics is a big part of our identity. Sorry, I'm choking.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to last a little longer for you.
Athletics is a big part of our identity. So we look at some of the reason that's why students look at us, right? Is it a major deciding factor? Not always, because not every student is athletic, and we also have a really strong arts program. But I would argue if you were looking at a school such as Interlochen or Walnut Hill, which are heavier in the arts, then your child's artistic portfolio might matter. So I think it depends on the school. I think it depends on what the school is looking for. And I also think on the flip side, are there opportunities for your child to engage? So I'll give you a great scenario. I have a student right now who came to us as an incoming 10th grader. And we are a cut sports school, meaning you have to try out for sports. And you may or may not make the team depending on your ability. And unfortunately, this child came and the parents thought he could just go golf. And that's not quite how it works. And so in the admission process, had we known that he was interested in golf, because we would have asked those questions, or they might have asked those questions, we would have been able to share with him, you can't just show up and golf. And so asking again those questions that are important to you in terms of this entire experience is very, very important. So as you're going through the tour, I tell students all the time, this is all about you. Mom and dad really get to write the check, but this is really about you. Is this a place where you feel like you can try new things, where you can embrace deeper into the academic process? Maybe you're interested in international travel as part of your educational program. Does the school offer that? Maybe you're interested in immersion programs. Does the school offer that? So really understanding why you're looking at an independent school and then asking those questions during the admission process.
So you're actually dovetailing lovely into my next question and maybe already kind of answered it. But we went through kind of how the school looks at a candidate and views everything and tries to kind of understand the story, the full story of a student. But if you put your parent hat on now and you're evaluating schools, how do you come to that this is the right school for my child decision? What are some of the questions you're asking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am a parent. I'm a mom of two boys, and certainly went through this process with them both at the school level and at the college level. And again, I mean, we were looking at geography. I mean, as simple as geography. You know, if you don't like snow, then the Sunshine State might be your place. And then what you do is say, well, what schools are here? If you are a really strong lacrosse player, well, what schools have a strong lacrosse program? And then what does their academic program look like? What does the boarding program support look like? Is it a big school? Is it a small school? Is it a pre-K through 12 school? So if my child starts in the fifth grade, can they just continue to move up until they graduate? You might be interested in how does the academic schedule work? There are some schools that are much more experiential, so much more learning by doing. There's some schools that are much more traditional in their programming. You might want to look at the college lists. Where do those students go upon graduating from your school? And how well prepared are they? So how do you prepare for your students for their life beyond your school? These are all questions that I would ask. I would ask about support programs. If I had a child who required learning support or was neurodiverse, I would be asking questions about what's your learning center look like? What does your counseling program look like? What happens if a child is experiencing some challenges academically? How does the school support them? When do you notify your parents? What's that partnership look like from the school to the parent? I would ask all of those questions in terms of this partnership with you and your child and what is the best. So you're really looking around. I think a lot of folks come on campus and they get wowed by our campuses. I mean, we have impressive schools with impressive facilities. I think if you're looking at a school like ours and many others in the country and in Canada, you can expect really strong academics. You can expect really a robust artistic program, a very competitive athletic program. You can expect certain things, but it's the things that you do at home with your child that you want to ask about. I really believe that this journey is a partnership between the school and you for what is in the best interest of your child. And if you don't feel that, or if you don't see it, you need to ask those questions. But also, what you're doing by asking those questions is, as a parent, I'm sharing with you who my child is and what environment he will thrive or she will thrive best in. And I think those are really important questions because they help us as admission people also determine, is this a right fit? Because I am very transparent with my parents. I will say, I'm just not sure this is the greatest fit, but let me work with you because I know some schools where I think this might be a better fit for your child.
Kyla, you just got in there and stole my next question, which was really going to be because you and I were talking about this before the presentation. And I know schools, essentially to the families, to, use your admissions representative as a resource
Yep.
because they do know the landscape of the schools very well. And a lot of times schools will flat out ask families what other schools you are applying to. And I know that can put families off or they put their defenses up, and naturally that's the way I would probably take it at first too, like, wait, why do you want to know? But kind of
Sure.
maybe you can dig into why you ask that often.
Yeah, I absolutely, and sometimes we do ask the question, and I will tell you why, because what we're looking for is, do you really understand who we are as a school? And then what is it ultimately that you're hoping for in terms of your child's experience? I can tell you previously, I worked at a very, very small school, very robust experiential program, non-traditional programming. And we would cross over often with a school that was incredibly traditional and much bigger. And I kept saying to parents, how did you arrive? And one was a military school. And I was like, how did you arrive on these two? Because we couldn't be farther apart. And sometimes it was, well, you both have hockey. And I'd say, but in terms of academic and school environment, we are very different. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your child and how they perform in school right now. What is their self-efficacy skills? How do they approach, their academic work? What kind of support do they need when they get home? I mean, do you do all their laundry? Do you have to prompt them to do their homework? I mean, in which case that also frames a right fit school for your child. I used to work for somebody who used to say, selecting the right school for your child is often like, unfortunately, this is a bad reference, but trying on a pair of running shoes. Some of us really like Nike. Some of us really like New Balance because it fits us. And that is a simplistic way of saying the same should be said about choosing a right fit school for your child.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to go with New Balance given the two. But for the next step of this presentation, I would love to take 5 minutes and learn more about the Bolles School. I think we got a lot of people attending who could benefit from learning more about your school and an environment such as this. That said, we have plenty more questions coming up, everyone. We've still got to cover interviews, essays, all the big things. And we know there's a lot of questions on the SSAT and when to submit scores and that sort of stuff. So we're going to get to all of those. But
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So the Bolles School is located in Jacksonville, Florida, which is in the northeast part of the state, almost on the Georgia border. And the Bolles School is a little bit unique in the world of independent day boarding schools because we are a very large school. Pre-K through 12, we have about 1,800 students. In our upper school, grades 9 through 12, we have about 800 students, with 100 of those students who live on campus and are boarding students. Now, many of us know the Bolles School because of our athletic program, and specifically in swimming. We're very well known for our swimming program. We've been national champions many, many times over. Each year, we have students or former students who compete in the Olympics for swimming. So it is something that we're really well known for. But we offer many other opportunities at the Bolles School outside of the swimming program. So I'm not going to emphasize the swimming too much. Um, One of the nice things about the Bolles School is its size. And because it is a large school, that means it's a large program. There's a lot happening under our roof. So academically, we offer about 30 AP classes or advanced placement classes, which are pre-college classes. There's a wide range of academic offerings under each discipline. So under English, you'll find several subjects to take as a grade 9 through 12 that will fulfill that English requirement. And there are many offerings like that under math, science, English, technology, and world languages. So you're going to see a robust offering, almost like a liberal arts college. On the athletic side, we offer 29 varsity and junior varsity sports. We also have club component opportunities in swimming and crew, track and field, tennis, and golf. So there's a lot of opportunity again here at Bolles. Um, on the art side, we offer 15 performing art elective courses and multiple fine art offerings. And so, whatever the student's passion is, they can likely find it here and fulfill that passion of theirs. Um, as of the last 2 years, we just cut the ribbon on our new Center for Innovation, which is filled with wonderful classrooms that really focus on fabrication and technology. There's a 3D printer in there, the only one of its kind in the United States that now can, print me if it wanted to. Not a real me, but not a fake me, a plastic me. There's all sorts of things for students to be creative. And what I love about our Center for Innovation is it's a place where students can walk in and go, I've been thinking about how can I do this? And there will be a professor in there that says, let's see if we can do that. Let's try, touch, see, do, let's explore. And so I love that about our Center for Innovation. There's multiple support pieces that are set up. We have a full learning support team, multiple counselors on campus that help to support our students who live and work and study in this space. On the boarding side, again, we have 100 boarders. They come from all over the world and within the United States. And oftentimes our boarding students come because they're coming for a very specific reason. They want to take an area outside of the classroom that they're really passionate about and take it to the next level. And because of Bolles' size, we're fortunate enough to have enough resources to really support our students to excel in those areas of passion. I think what I need to say on the flip side of that is we're not for everybody. This is not a school as a boarding family. If you said, well, I just want my child to have a cultural experience, I would say, you know what, there's really great boarding schools in the country and in Canada that can offer that for your child. We're probably not it. We're really a school where kids come and they're very intentional about why they're coming to Bolles. It often is the marriage of a great academic program with a really competitive athletic program. So keep that in mind. If you called me and said, Kyla, I really am interested in Bolles for my child, I'm going to start asking you questions about, tell me more about your child. What do they like to do outside of the classroom? How do you think that they would thrive in a larger school setting? Are they a self-starter? Do they have some initiative in terms of their coursework? Or do they tend to be a little bit more reserved, need a little bit more support in terms of, hey, let's get on board and where's your child at? Because we want to make sure that we're able to meet them where they're at as well. When looking at Bolles, just know I have no doubt that if you were to come visit, you would be wowed by the facilities and the location. But again, this is where you have to look inward, and your child has to look inward and say, is this a place where I feel I can, add to the community, but also achieve my best success and leave my footprint? Because I want kids to leave their footprint here so that when they come back 20 years from now, they can go, I did that. That was me. And so that's really important for us. We sit on a beautiful landscape of about 50 acres, as you can see there. Our backdrop is the St. Johns River. It's in a residential area, so it's very safe and secure, fully gated. We're very fortunate to have this beautiful campus. And as you saw from the facilities, they're pretty top notch. But one of the things that I love about our campus is there's lots of quiet spaces, because For those of us like me who live on campus, so I live where I work, it's sometimes the walls can close in a little bit. And for our students too, they live where they go to school. That's not normal. And so for them, it's nice for them to have a quiet space where they can just go take their brain off and be. And there's no pressure. And there are a ton of spaces on our campus for that. What did I miss, Darren?
I think you covered most everything there. What I do appreciate is, you really defined, the students who are poised to succeed on your campus. And ultimately, I think the message here really for everyone, as you go and start looking at different schools, you're going to hear the admissions teams talk a lot about finding the right match. Kyla just said the more reserved students might not be the best fit for Bolles, but there are schools out there where they excel at that and wonderful schools as well. So
Yeah.
that's really what this process is about, ultimately, is finding that right match for your child where they can be successful. Um, so that said, let's jump back into some of the questions. You as a boarding school, I would like to reward our international families who are attending this presentation at all hours of their evening and morning. We should
Thank you.
we should say. So with that, are there things that the international families need to know? Certainly, things changing when applying to a U.S. school in terms of visa requirements, anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. So again, really partner with your admission folks. So for instance, for the Bolles School, I am the primary or principal designated school official for SEVIS, which is the visa issuer for the United States. So I work with all of our families one-to-one. I talk to them about best practice in terms of that. And so, depending on where you're from, it is a great question to ask each school about, how do you support your international families through that process? How do you support your international students once they arrive? And then how do you incorporate your school programming so that your international families or your families from your boarding families can be a part of your school program? So that is really important because if you're from Spain and we're having an awards ceremony, do we live stream it? Do we partner with you so that you can log in and watch that? And if not, why don't you? And what do you do to help us feel as though we are included in our school, our child's educational journey at your school? I think those are really important questions as international families. I probably should have mentioned here at Bolles, one of the unique qualities also for us is we are extremely diverse with over 74 countries represented among our student body pre-K through 12, and we speak over 36 languages. So we are super fortunate to have that because that's a whole education outside of the classroom that I think really helps break down some barriers and some misperceptions. And it's also not in the brochure in terms of that educational influence on your child.
Excellent. Thank you, Kyla. Um, Jumping into if we're talking about the essay now, what do you look for in an essay? What jumps out at you when you're reading an essay?
Yeah. Uh, First and foremost, that it's more than one sentence. You'll be amazed at how many essays that we receive, often from middle schoolers, that really don't spend a lot of time answering the question. So we're looking at, was the question answered? Um, did we stay on topic? We're looking at, was it written in terms of, was the way that it was written relatable to the child's age and the grade of entry? So for instance, if you're applying as an 11th grader, I would argue that should be a fairly well written essay. If you're applying as a 6th grader, there's a little bit of wiggle room because there's still skills that you haven't developed yet academically to write the same as an 11th grader. I will tell you, AI is a big part of this. We're looking at that. We're looking at are there markers that would suggest that maybe the child did not write it themselves? And the other thing I say to parents often is don't edit it. Let it be their authentic voice. I mean, even if you think, well, this is not great, we want to see, did the child do it themselves? And who are they? Because it doesn't have to be perfect. So it's one piece. Remember, it's one piece.
Is it almost problematic if it is perfect?
Yes.
Okay.
It can be too perfect.
It can be
Yes.
that's a red flag,
Yes.
effectively, is what we're hearing. All right, let's transition that to interviews,
Ah,
and how can parents help, prepare their children, particularly that's probably the piece that the kids get most nervous about.
yep.
What's the, I guess, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, the best way to approach the interview process?
Yep. It's a great, it is a concern because I think it does cause a little bit of anxiety for students. Um, I will also argue that I actually think it's the most important piece sometimes of the process because I really want to know who the child is authentically. Who are you? What's important to you? What makes you tick? Why do you want this experience? How will have you done your homework about the school? I can tell you that many of my colleagues in this industry will tell you that we've interviewed kids who did not know the school at all. And so as we're asking them questions, they're like, I don't know. And so I would always tell the student, do a little bit of homework, get on the website, what stands out for you, what things did you like, or what did you find appealing, or where did you think, I wonder what that is. Um, be your authentic self. I would also argue if you're in an in-person, dress for success. Make yourself memorable. Dress like you're applying. Um, be armed with one or two really good questions. I tell my students all the time when they come in to interview with my upper school director, I want you to make him sweat. Ask him that really tough question. Maybe you're asking him, why do you work here? What do you love about Bolles? How did you end up here? And what was appealing to you? And what do you think is the best part of the Bolles experience? I love questions like that. Um, be able to really articulate why that school is the school that you would really like to attend. And again, share what you do. What have you accomplished? I think even adults, we sometimes struggle with a little bit of this because we think, well, that sounds like we're bragging. But, maybe pick those one or two things that you're really proud of that you've accomplished and say, this is something that I want you to know about me. Or this is really important in my world. I think you should know about this. So that interview piece is really an opportunity for the child to have a conversation with the admission person to say, "Hey, these are the things I want you to know about me, and I want you to remember about me, and this is what's important." On the flip side, some schools will also do the same thing with parents. So at my school, we also do parent interviews. So really what we're looking for is alignment, right? Is your expectation the same as your child's, right? Again, the worst case scenario would be if you said, my child's going to this school, and the child said, I don't want to go to this school. So those two things, we're looking for that alignment. Sometimes we're looking at what's the expectation, how do you value the partnership with the school? Do you understand um, the educational experience that your child might receive at that school? So we're also asking parents some questions, and on the flip side, parents, be armed with some good questions coming in and really understanding why you want this opportunity for your child.
We got a lot of questions, parents asking, what do you see as good grades? What if a child's grades aren't good? What about their test scores? I presume the parent interview is also that opportunity to talk about your child and talk about, yeah, the kid struggled this year.
Yep,
He or she kept getting pneumonia, or,
yep.
to kind of explain and have a good conversation about, what the school can support, etc. It sounds like you agree with that.
I totally agree. I mean, I guess, in both the admission process and the financial aid process, sometimes it can feel largely personal. If you're sharing as a parent, maybe you're going through a not so nice divorce. I don't know if there's a nice divorce, but maybe you're going through a really bad divorce, right? And maybe that has affected the child and their academic performance. Maybe there was a blip in the radar. You know, talk about that. Share that experience with the admission folks and with the financial aid folks. That's really important because financially, it's going to affect your financial picture, right? On the admission side, it's going to affect what we might see either in the teacher rec or in the grade performance. How important the grades are, the test scores are, the teacher recommendations also depends on the selectivity of that school. So every school has a different, level of selectivity, and depending on how selective those schools are might weight those the academic performance differently. So that is a great question to ask the admission person. You know, how many new students did you admit in the ninth grade last year? How many new girls did you admit in the ninth grade last year? How many new boarding girls did you admit in the ninth grade? So ask those questions. Ask what the academic performance is. Maybe bring a copy of your child's performance to date and say, hey, can you have a look at these? Tell me what you think. I mean, is this bad? Or, how will the committee look at this? I mean, almost every admission person I know would look at you and be as transparent as possible because they would want you to set your child up for the best success.
In that same vein, I think parents often shy away from asking questions about when they have children with learning differences and asking questions about how the school would be able to support them, which ultimately, my hunch is your answer is going to be along the realm of that's potentially doing a disservice to the child. How do you view that?
Yeah, and I know that this is a tough, sensitive area. You know, I I guess I'm going to answer it with a scenario. I mean, let's just say, Darren, that you have a 14-year-old who is very neurodiverse and needs some very specific supports in order for them to really achieve good success. And if you were applying to a school that didn't have strong learning center support, I think it's incumbent upon that school to say to you, listen, I've read your child's psychological educational report and the recommendations put forth by that psychologist. I don't think that we can support your child. It does not mean that we might not admit them, but what it means is if you put your child in that academic environment knowing that we would not be able to support them, that's a different scenario. So the more you share, the more transparent we can be with who we can support and who we can't support. Because if we think about the long-term educational success of the child and putting that child in an environment where they thrive, they're happy, they're achieving success, because we knew how to support them, we knew what their learning needs were. That's the best case scenario. And the same could be said on the counseling side. If your child's has gone through some things, and they've been rather tough for them to deal with, or maybe they're not overly resilient right now. I mean, share that because I really believe that the admission folks need to be honest and open with you to say, you know, this is going to be really tough for them. I mean, if your child is already, experiencing some social emotional issues and you put them into a boarding environment, that can exacerbate whatever issues they're dealing with. And that is not a good recipe for success. So really being mindful of the environment that you're putting your child in. And the only way to do that is to share. And I know it is sensitive. I know there's a fear that we might say no because of. I would argue, I would rather be able to say, I'm not, the admission decision is not incumbent on the testing or the fact that the child has had counseling. The admission decision is going to be based on whether or not we think we can support your child to achieve their best success and if we are the right environment for them. And vice versa, on your side should be the same.
And I think per our conversation earlier, using you as a resource to better understand if we came to that conclusion that my child maybe is not going to get the support that they need at your school, I could, in fair play, say, Kyla, you know this landscape better than me. Can you recommend some schools we should be looking at?
I do it all the time. One of the things that parents should keep in mind is that the admission world is quite small, and we know each other's schools, and we have no problem picking up the phone and saying, I'm working with this family. I'm not sure we're the right fit, but I thought of your school. Would you please consider them? It happens all the time. This is the admission landscape for independent schools in both US and Canada is a widely collegial industry, and we all know each other. We've traveled together. We know of each other. We've been on webinars with each other. So we get to know each other's schools, and if we don't, we might even call and say, is this a profile of a student that might be a better fit for your school? In the event that I would know that they would not be a good fit for my school.
Perfect. All right. We are quickly running out of time. This presentation is going way faster than I thought it would. I do want to get to some SSAT questions because I know folks, there were a lot of questions around that. But first, real quickly, because you are a boarding school and this has come up a lot in the questions, whether it be for the interview or an open house, how important is it for folks to be there in person on campus? Obviously, some families are living on the other side of the world
Yep.
that their child ends up attending your school. If it's just not feasible for them, are they going to get docked if they're doing virtual interviews or can't attend an open house?
No, I would say there's no negative side, except for that I really believe that there is a intuition or a feeling that you experience by stepping foot on campus that you just cannot get virtually. And I just believe that. I believe in my heart that that if you can try to be present on a campus, I mean you're making a pretty big decision for your child. And you would also want to meet the people that are, especially from a boarding component, you would want to meet the people that are going to be caring for your child while they're living where they go to school. So there's no negative impact in the admission process. I would say it best practice in terms of making the best decision and the most informed decision on your and your child's behalf.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to drop a link here in the chat about testing options. So a lot of the SSAT questions we got, there's the big picture one that I'll ask you, but I just want to quickly answer some of a lot of them were how many times can we take the SSAT, what modes, that sort of stuff. So most tests can be taken multiple times. I just put the options in there. The one caveat I would, or when's the right time to take the SSAT? Usually the earliest you can, the better, in case you do want to take another assessment on it. What I would say, typically students who take it more than once do better, but there's a huge caveat on that. And that is, understanding the conditions and the environment around the first time they took it. So students, the amount a student can do better is really proportional to the area for improvement they have. So if your student took the SSAT once and they were super nervous and they just clammed up and they came out of it and the scores are lower than what's reflective of their abilities, that's a situation where you probably say, hey, we should probably do this again. A student that did pretty good and their scores are reflective of their situation, you probably don't need to put them through the stress of doing the test again because the schools look at it in a range. So even if they improve their score by 10 points, Kyla, I'm pretty sure you're going to tell me that doesn't mean anything to you, that 10-point difference. So always keep that in mind. It's all kind of in perspective of, how they did the first time and what they is really indicative of what their abilities are there. So keep that in mind. The other big question is how to submit the scores to schools or when to submit the scores to schools. So if you log into our portal, there's a page in there for submitting scores. Two things to understand. You go in and you put the schools that you want to submit your scores to. So if I were to go in and put the Bolles School today, but my kid's taking the SSAT in say a week, or they took it a day ago and the results aren't out yet. In that scenario, because I put the Bolles School in before the results are released, Kyla's going to get the results immediately as soon as they're released. She may even get to look at them before I do as the parent. So that's a great thing to do when you're hurrying getting the scores through, especially if we're in January and you're at the end of the process. Um, but if I want to see my child's scores before I submit them to Kyla, I would wait, let my child take the test, let the scores get released, see if I want to submit them. Maybe I want to have my child take it again before I submit them. And in that scenario, I go and enter the schools that I want to submit the scores to after the fact. So Kyla, the question for you, is always how important is this? How do you use the test scores? I think there's a good framing to be had there from your end of the stick.
Yep. I mean, again, and I cannot stress enough that the test is one piece of this process. Where the emphasis on the test scores comes in is if there's alignment in academic performance and what the teacher recs say. So if we see a weaker quantitative score and the math teacher rec says, echoes that maybe the child really struggles in math, and then we see the grade that is maybe a D in math, that's very correlative data, right? But often what we will see is maybe the test scores were a little wonky. The teacher rec says that, Darren's child works really hard and the grade is a B. And so that can suggest some other things, right? Maybe this wasn't the day for the child to take the test. Maybe they just really, maybe something happened. Maybe they were sick the day before. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep. Maybe they didn't do a couple practice tests, so they didn't really understand the standardized test model. And so I really believe, to prepare for the test, do a couple practice tests and get your child ready, because that test will also, the practice test will also say where some of the gaps are, and you will be able to see that before the child takes the test. I cannot emphasize enough, do not stress about this, right? Approach it in a very, let's do a practice test and just see what happens. Because again, we're looking at all parts of the admission consideration process, not just the test. The test is not sink or swim. It's not the same as an ACT or an SAT. Okay? It is one piece of that child's picture. So the other thing I will say is get a good night's sleep. Eat a great breakfast if that's their thing. And really walk in with, I'm just going to do my very best, and that's all I can do.
I the don't stress part, I can't echo that enough. And I think just to kind of give an antidote, it's important to understand that schools aren't just looking at these test results to make admissions decisions. For some schools, that's even a small part of why they do it. Anecdotally, I know a family, their child just moved from a public school to a private school. I asked them, how's your son doing? And I got that, oh, that parent look that you get in September. And they're like, it's great now. But, over the summer, he had to do a lot of courses and a lot of other stuff to get up to speed to be on a level playing field with the other kids who were already at that school in math. And the school knew that student needed that extra tutoring in preparation over the summer because
Yep,
he had taken the test score and they were able to see, like, this is a kid that's going to be great here.
yep,
He's not at the math level our students are through no fault of his own, just because he hasn't been getting the same courses they have, and we can get him caught up, right?
yep.
I think a lot of times parents are afraid that their child isn't going to get that score and get cut out, but the school's looking at it of like, no, we can make up the gap. We just need to know where they're at.
I think too, you bring up a great point because timing is everything. So if you think about the admission process being from, say, September until let's just say February, and I'm a seventh grade student applying to eighth grade, there's going to be material that I may not have covered in the seventh grade until November or December. So maybe push that test to November. It's fine as long as you're meeting the application deadline for admission, right? So we run a test right into January. So we know that those test scores are coming in. We know that those children have tested. So they're going to meet the January 30th deadline.
Excellent. All right, Kyle, we're running over one last question. If there's one takeaway that you hope families walk away from this presentation with, what is it?
Yep. I love this question. We have to remember as parents, but also as admission folks and as school folks, that this is all about the student thriving in this educational experience or landscape or where school, wherever they end up. Um, is this a place where my child will be needed and known, where they can thrive and achieve their best success, but also have exposure to opportunity and engage in a level that works for them, um, and have the support that they need, depending on what type of a learner they are. So, know your child and know yourself and why you're looking at this for your child. It would be the piece of advice I would give. Because I love when a parent comes in and says, listen, this is who my child is. This is what we're looking for. Walk me through Bolles and how, is this the right fit?
Excellent. That's great advice. Kyla, thank you very much for doing this today. I'm sure you have helped so many people immensely today. And for all of you attending, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate you being here and all of your questions. And of course, we wish you the best in your continued process for finding that right match for your child.
Thank you.